Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana. Do you feel that you need to detox yourself from friendships that no longer serve you? Or perhaps you need to learn how to be a better friend? Well, this show's for you. We're here today with special guest, Erin Falconer, and she's here to share with us her new book, How to Break Up with Your Friends: Finding Meaning, Connection, and Boundaries in Modern Friendship. So, Erin is an author, holds a master's degree in clinical psychology, is a digital entrepreneur, and an editor-in-chief and co-owner of PickTheBrain, which is a highly trusted self-improvement community online. She was named one of the top digital entrepreneurs in Los Angeles by LA Confidential and is one of the top 7 women changing the digital landscape for good by Refinery29. So welcome to the show, Erin.
Thank you so much for having me.
What an honor it is to have you here and to talk about this book. I'm sure everyone's picked this up going, what the heck? We have to break up with our friends now.
Yes. Well, full disclosure, there's only one chapter, and there are 10 chapters. There's only one chapter on actually how to break up with your friends. There are 9 on the fundamental importance of friendships and how to do them a lot better than we are doing them right now.
So when you wrote this book, what was the main inspiration?
My first book was very squarely in the kind of female empowerment, female productivity space. And as I was looking for a follow-up, I kind of went after, down different rabbit holes, ending, dead end after dead end. I was either kind of uninterested, or I felt like the topics were retread, and I was getting really frustrated. And then one morning at about 6 a.m., I woke up kind of half asleep, half awake, and this phrase, how to break up with your friends, was just in my head. And I was kind of like, what is that? I tried to go back to sleep, couldn't really. And for the next couple of days, this idea just kind of kept popping up, resurfacing. And to the point of kind of great irritation. And finally, I was like, what is this about? What is this about? And I stopped and I started to think about my own friendships, one friendship in particular, which on paper, I would have said we are, best friends. We've been friends for a really long time and, have had over the years a really close relationship. And when I started to look at that friendship, though, I realized there was a lot of kind of built up frustration and irritation. And I was like, that's interesting. How did we get here? And as I sort of kind of looked back, historically over the friendship, all of this kind of information was revealed to me, and nothing big, nothing dramatic, just, things that hadn't been addressed in the friendship. And so then I started to look at the other people in my life, and I had this epiphany that I couldn't believe this was the first time I'm doing this. Right? We are a culture that is obsessed with information, and specifically information, about ourselves. We know every calorie we're eating, every gram of fat. We wear watches that tell us every step we're taking. Marie Kondo has us holding up chairs and sweaters and asking if they bring joy. And yet the people in our lives, especially this particular group, relationship group, friendship, we have very little eyes on. And so I started to kind of really, really look at that. And what I kind of came to was that this was such an incredibly missed opportunity. We have all of this potential support and love and allies right kind of at the tip of our nose. And yet we're just dialing these friendships in. These are kind of the one relationship group that we think should be nice to have and kind of give. But anytime there's any kind of conflict or angst, it's kind of like, ugh, I don't want to touch that. And so we don't. And what ends up happening is we are leaving a lot of kind of greatness on the table. So that's kind of the genesis of it.
So do you think, just kind of like with your story, that most, when they have something that's going on in a friendship, would rather just overlook it than deal with it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and I started again with my own personal kind of cases. And because I really was sort of flabbergasted when I looked at the chasm that had been kind of driven between me and my friend, the first one that I was talking about. And yet there was no, contrary to like media portrayals of female friendships, there was no big betrayal, she hadn't like tried to steal my romantic partner or, take a job promotion away from me. So it's more like death by a thousand cuts, right? Where, at least in my case, it was like this particular friend would always be chronically late, and not by like 5 minutes, but, by like 30, 40 minutes. And then she'd arrive out of breath and we'd spend the next 10 to 15 minutes, explaining to me why she was so late, and that kind of thing. And so, instead of just bringing it up, I was like, every time I was going to bring it up, I was like, I watched myself kind of talking myself out of it. Like, oh, it's not that big a deal. She's a single mom. We're all very busy. She's trying her best. I don't know. This feels like I don't want to add to another thing on her plate by, bringing, quote unquote drama. And so, yeah, I do think we end up talking ourselves out of addressing these things. But the problem is when you try to numb yourself to a specific behavior in somebody, you don't really have controls on that. What you end up doing is numbing yourself across the board to them. Right. And that's kind of what happened with this particular friend. So that I wasn't, I guess, being irritated enough to like say anything, but I also wasn't feeling a whole lot of joy also from the relationship. And so that's one scenario. Or you can kind of push something down, push something down, push something down, and then have what feels like a really irrational explosion over something that, seems pretty small, but has been building up and building up. And then that can cause a really big kind of chasm if the other person isn't aware that you've been feeling these big frustrations, and then you kind of snap. But one of the things for me, when I looked at like, why do we kind of behave this way or operate this way in friendship, is I'm a psychotherapist, and in traditional therapy, we have individual therapy, couples therapy, family therapy, and yet there's nothing for friendship therapy. And while I'm not necessarily, advocating for friend couples to go out and find a therapist, although I don't think it's a bad idea in some of the more meaningful friendships, what that means to me, though, is that there's no kind of collectively agreed upon language out there in the zeitgeist to navigate conflict in these relationships. There's no real blueprint about how to get into new ones, how to get out of existing ones. And therefore it's kind of almost taboo. And going back to the title, so obviously there's some shock value in that, but that was not why the top title was chosen, even though there's only one chapter. For me, it's really important conceptually to have this idea on the table with any relationship, right? That there can be a limited shelf life. This is not like once we become friends, we're in this forever and we're just going to take this for granted. You need to have some stakes there, some responsibility there, some accountability there. And so I'm obviously not advocating for you to go through your, as I say, right at the beginning of the book, to go through your contact list with a machete. But what I do advocate for is you to get really clear on what you will and will not take, how you kind of demand to be seen and supported. And also, of course, it's reciprocal. You have to put in, the reciprocal energy to the other person in the relationship. But just to be really clear on how you want to show up in the world and making sure you have relationships that support that.
It has me thinking with not just the title, but I think it is an important piece that we're kind of touching on here is who do we take inventory of and just really kind of look at how we have these relationships? Is that how we should kind of move forward?
Well, yeah. And I mean, so here's the thing. I think the first thing, even though this is clearly a book about relationships, the starting point for any good relationship, no matter what kind of relationship, is with the self. And so for me, the real starting point is getting clear on who you are and what your needs are. And so I always say the first starting point is you have to be able to answer the 4 following questions. Who am I? Where am I? How did I get here? And where do I want to go? right? And that's, you don't answer those questions like by scribbling down quickly the answers. You need to spend some real time understanding how you want to be seen and show up in the world. That's kind of the first step, right? Because without that, we're kind of out there collecting friendships or relationships blindly, right? It's hard to enforce boundaries when you're not sure what your boundaries are. It's hard to really be seen and understood if you don't see yourself in a certain light and have at least a basic understanding of the self. So that's kind of the starting point. And the first chapter in the book is, you should be your own best friend first. And so that really is the starting point. But short of that, or right after that, I have a really simple litmus test, right? I talk about this all the time. Like if your phone rings and you pick up your phone and you see a name on a call display, what is your gut reaction? Is it like, like an eye roll and like, oh my God? Or are you jumping to the phone to take that call? Or do you feel nothing at all? Right. And so I ask you, and as you know, there's homework basically at the end of every chapter. But one of the starting points is to take a pen and paper and write down every person kind of in that inner circle, and then maybe in the kind of intermediate circle in your life. And all I ask you to do is, as you're writing the name on the piece of paper, what is your gut instinctual reaction to seeing that name on the paper? You've got a lot of really good information right there. And so, as I kind of said with the cell phone thing, often we'll feel a sense of irritation or frustration when we see the name, or you might feel, a big heart swell of emotion. You might feel nothing at all. And this is all really good information to have, because ideally, it's not that, really good friendships are skipping through a sunny field. Not everything is going to be joy, happiness, joy, but they should give you a sense of positive energy when you think about them, when you reflect on them. And that's kind of where you want to be. That's kind of the sweet spot. So if you're feeling anything contrary to that, or worse, actually, I would argue nothing at all, these are relationships that you really need to kind of look at and say, okay, how did we get here? What can I do? What can we do differently? What can I do differently? Or is this something that, after answering those 4 basic questions about myself, I feel that this relationship might just not fit with me anymore, right? And if that's the case, well, then what do we do about it? So yeah, that's a very basic place to start. And a lot of it is just kind of instinctual. The problem is, because we have these instincts in us, it's just with this friendship, with this relationship group, we're constantly not paying attention, right? And so what the book is asking over and over again of the reader is to pay attention to this, pay attention to that, start paying attention, because there's a wealth of information that we're just not paying attention to.
I think you're so right on this. And that's one of the things I really appreciate about your book, is just how we can develop these boundaries, because a lot of times people don't even know what their values are.
Right.
And to identify that, I think, is so empowering.
Totally. And I hear a lot in my practice, she just crossed a boundary with me. And the first question I ask is, and I do it delicately, but I say, did you ever communicate, either verbally or non-verbally, that boundary to begin with? Because so often now, we hope that most people are aware that there are general boundaries that you shouldn't cross. But we live in a very busy, very chaotic time where people, again, are not paying attention to a lot of things. And so it's really important in the healthiest of relationships to be able to be clear on your boundaries upfront or real time as something's happening, as opposed to after the fact, right? Because then there's a much bigger sense of friction or a blowout. And the truth is, most times people are not even aware they're crossing a boundary. That is not an excuse necessarily. It's not an excuse for bad behavior, but you can see that if you're clear, kind of upfront, and the only way you can be clear upfront is if you've taken the time to say, hey, what really are my non-negotiables? What are the things that really irritate me or that really burn my energy? What space do I feel the best operating in? Once you have a really clear idea of that in your mind, it's not even so much as about like sending an email with the 10 things a friend shouldn't do. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is once you're clear on it, you put energy there, right? There's something in the way you operate that communicates non-verbally. Don't go there. This is not for me. Right in that, I think you do a lot to kind of protect those boundaries, but it's far more difficult, if not impossible, to do if you yourself have not gotten really clear, again, on what those non-negotiables are for you.
So there's a couple things I want to touch on here. I know in your book you talk about the loneliness epidemic that we're going through.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you have people that say, well, I've got these two friends I've had since elementary school, and one is very disempowering, and the other one, when they call, I want to throw my phone in the ocean. How do I set boundaries with people that maybe don't have any?
Well, I have to say that this is where hard decisions kind of need to be made. And you have to look at a relationship, obviously, net. You have to say, what is the landscape of this friendship like in its entirety, and what is it giving me at any one moment, right? And if, you realize that over time, you've gotten in a place where this is a relationship that really kind of takes more than it gives. And if you reflect on it and you think, okay, even if I spent a considerable amount of energy trying to get this relationship back on track, and the other participant was willing, I'm just not sure if it's the right relationship for me, then you have to start making some decisions. And it's really difficult to do, right? Especially because, as you kind of led with this idea of loneliness, people are lonely. They want, I guess, in people's minds, well, it's better to have two kind of crappy friends than no friends at all. But actually, I would argue that's not true, because the energy that you're spinning, and it's often way more, it's kind of like an iceberg. The energy you think you're spinning on a bad relationship, you're really only consciously tapping into the tip of that iceberg. You're burning through a vast amount more of energy than you even realize. And so when you are intentional in these relationships, and when you communicate kind of what you will and will not tolerate, what you really expect, what you yourself are going to bring to that relationship, and those needs can't be met by the other person, you are far better to make a decision around that relationship and free up that energy to attract or to intentionally go out and seek out the right relationship in your life, the right friendship for you. And so it's kind of a scary proposition, but frankly, you can do much better. And so having these hard conversations and making these hard choices are so that you free up space to have a much better situation moving forward. Because again, you don't realize how much energy you're actually spending on bad or mediocre relationships that don't serve you.
Isn't that the truth? I think we all can look back on maybe a friend that's not kind or supportive and going, gosh, why am I even friends with this person?
Right. How did I get here? Exactly. Like, how did we get here? And it's hard to remember, like, what was so good about this in the first place. But the truth of the matter is, remotely interested in self growth or evolving as a person, you are going to change, and your fundamental core values probably won't change, but your life experience, how dynamic you kind of operate in the world, changes, and you're not always going to move in the same direction with everybody in your life. Certainly not all of the friends in your life, and that doesn't mean they're moving in a worse direction or you're moving in a better direction. They're just different directions, and we have to make space for the possibility that some relationships are really great at certain moments in time, and we need to just kind of cultivate and appreciate them then, as opposed to dragging them on with for a lifetime in kind of like a legacy capacity. Because then what ends up happening is those really nice moments, those really kind of fertile friend moments that really served both of you at the time, you start forgetting about that. That stops being the defining moments of those relationships. And what replaces it, in fact, is like low grade irritation or frustration. And so when you look at the friendship, it's more of an eye roll, as opposed to, oh wow, if we could have only just celebrated this for what it was at the time, and then separated when it was no longer operating in the same way, um, you'd have so many more fond memories, I think. And that all of those memories, positive memories, help bolster you. So we're really missing opportunities when we don't pay attention and then act intentionally around whatever information we're kind of digging up.
Now, you touched on this a little bit earlier, and I kind of want to really dive into this. You said that, and you have a whole chapter on this, that we should be our own best friend.
Right.
What does that mean, and how do we do that?
Well, I think, it goes back to kind of what I was saying before. Best way to be a really good friend is to model how you treat yourself to others, right? And so again, taking the time to really understand who you are, taking the time to really pay attention to what your needs are, and then advocating for those needs, being kind to yourself, watching how you talk to yourself. I've had moments where I look in the mirror and I'm like, oh my God, I look disgusting. These pants are too tight. And then I think to myself, man, imagine if I spoke to a friend like that. If my friend showed up and said, how do I look? And I was like, oh my God, you look disgusting. Those pants are too tight. You would never say that to a friend, right? But to yourself, you're saying it, you're saying it, almost instinctually. It takes a lot of work to not be self-critical. But the kinder you can be to yourself, the more kindness then you can kind of instill out into or distill into all of your relationships. The more respect you can hold for yourself, the firmer you can hold a boundary for yourself, the more patience you can give yourself, the more focus and attention you can give yourself, the more then you can give onto others. And I think that that's kind of like the spark that, again, even though this is a book that's relational, it starts with you. Right? It starts with the individual, and that you are the seed that is planted in the relationship, or I guess co-planted with another person. But you really want to pay attention to how you're treating yourself, because the better you treat yourself, the better you will operate in relationships. And then, relationships are what feed us as humans. And so good relationships, bad relationships can starve us, but good relationships feed you. And so the more you can pay attention to being kind to yourself and being really kind of intentional in your choices, not passive, but active in your life, the better you're going to do in relationships. And the more you'll demand that of the other partner in relationships. So it's kind of like, it's something that fuels itself. If you can get how you treat yourself right, it's a real catalyst for, it's not like times 2 positive results. It's kind of infinite.
I love that. I would think that when we're with people for a season, as opposed to like a lifetime sentence, and for some people we want to be around with our entire lives, and others it's like, wow, we're still doing this,
right. Right. Or yeah, exactly.
But it opens up the space for new people coming, because you're not wasting all this energy on a relationship that really isn't serving. I know a lot of people say your highest and best good, or just your life.
Right. I totally agree. And back to your point about the loneliness epidemic and your example of the person that has the 2 friends that are kind of crappy, but they'd rather have those friends than be alone. I also talk about the importance, and this is really kind of changing a dynamic in friendship. We don't really do, but we do it all the time with romantic relationships, is this idea of really putting yourself out there. Once you realize like, hey, I'm lonely, or you don't even have to be like desperately lonely, but hey, I feel like I need a couple of new friends, and I ask you in the book to kind of look at, who's in your life, all the roles they play, what you could be missing, from your needs, like, are there any holes there? And so the idea, though, is not, so many people think that friendships should kind of just happen. Like you'll be at the same party and somebody will, introduce you, and or you'll end up just kind of hanging out with new people by proxy. But that is, again, being passive and kind of letting those relationships happen to you. If you look at dating, and let's say you want a new romantic partner, what's the first thing you do? You put it out there. You say to your other friends, hey, I think I'm ready to date again. Or, hey, do you know anybody? I'm da 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 da. If you are out socially, you kind of have a lens like, okay, I'm looking for a romantic partner. And that's kind of like you walk into every, restaurant or bar, what a situation with that on. So I think the same needs to be true for friendship, right? We have to be a lot more intentional. If realize that you're stuck in a kind of lonely or happy friend situation, or even if you're not, if you're just curious about the world around you, I know it feels counterintuitive, but you really have to put yourself out there, not just in your head, although that's a good start too, just to be like energetically, hey, I'm going to go out and I want to meet a couple of new, interesting, dynamic people, but also literally saying to your friends, like, or coworkers, hey, I'm just making this up, but like, I'm a single mom, I'm starting a new career. I could really use another friend that's kind of in a similar situation to me. So we could kind of support one another. Putting that out there. If you are, let's say you have a dog, instead of just taking your dog for a walk, take your dog to a dog park. Put yourself in a situation where you have at least one piece of information that shows that you're in common. Okay. You both like dogs, right? You're out there, pay attention when you're at the dog park. Say, is anybody sparking my interest or my curiosity? Well, then throw the dog ball over there and walk over. I know it feels weird because we never do this with friends, but if you want something, go out and get it, right? And I think you'll be surprised how well that is reciprocated. Like to jog? Don't just jog around, around your neighborhood. Join a jogging club. Again, at least one thing you have in common with this group of people, and then see what happens. But you really do have to kind of take ownership and step into the ring, because that's then you happening to these relationships as opposed to these relationships happening to you. And I think those are going to be the best relationships always, ones that you've kind of put stakes in, put yourself out there. And I think that's when you're going to get the best result. Don't sit there and say, oh man, I've got 2 friends. I guess I'll just take this though, because the opportunity is the opposite is what? Nothing? No, of course not. Not if you put yourself out there.
It's just interesting if we make the effort, how we can really develop these friendships. In your opinion, what do you think kind of holds people back or stops them from being able to do this?
Well, I think it's just like we don't have conversations about this, and we don't really have a kind of blueprint like of how to do this. When we're first put on a playground, we're dropped on a playground, and it's like, well, find somebody here you like, right? And there's, because we don't really have any choice in the matter, our parents or parent or whatever is kind of putting us there. We kind of shuffle up to somebody and find somebody we like well enough, but there's not a lot of choice, right? And so we kind of are socialized in that way. Again, it's all about kind of proximity and what's nearest to me, as opposed to like going out there and finding somebody. Whereas again, with like romantic relationships, people will search the globe to find a romantic partner. And of course, the nature of those relationships are different, but I think that the way we approach them shouldn't be that different. And so like, I was talking the other day to somebody and I was giving them this dog park example. And the person I was talking to was like, well, what are you suggesting, that I just go up and start talking to somebody? And I was like, yeah. And they were like, and then what? And I was like, and then if the person seems cool, or you feel curious about them or interested, be like, hey, hey, if you ever want to get a coffee or whatever, I'd love to, and see what they say. And the person was so mortified that I was talking to, and I was like, this is the problem. We just don't do it. We don't normalize like, hey, you know what? I need a new friend. I'm going to go out and get one. So it feels so weird and like almost creepy, but it's not. It's just about being active and saying, hey, these are my needs. Now I'm going to go out and find a healthy way to fulfill them. And so it's more just about having the conversations about these types of relationships, and getting more comfortable, making more space for ourselves in them, and being a lot more intentional than we are. I think that's the thing. Like, we kind of are very passive in these relationships, and that's never a good position to operate from in any relationship. So yeah, I just think it's a thing like that we don't talk about. And I think it also does stem back from this idea of like, just from the therapeutic realm. I mean, people are talking about every other type of relationship. They'll go see a therapist and they'll talk to their friends about what the therapist said, and And these conversations are just out there for other types of relationships. They're just not out there in that way for friendship. And that's kind of one of my biggest hopes for the book, is that it starts these conversations so that people don't feel so weird being active in them, or at least they feel like they have the right to be very active in them.
They at least know how to approach. And I'm thinking, and maybe you can give me your thoughts on this. Is this like a generational thing? Because I know before iPhones, we had to talk to each other,
Right.
So
Yeah. I mean, look, definitely, I think that one of the problems is certainly that at least a portion of our relationships today are taken up kind of in a cyber world. And I don't think you feel like the same connection. And you can also be totally so much more avoidant in them. It's much easier to dodge real issues and kind of be passive or passive aggressive. But I do think it's something that does kind of affect all kind of generations of relationships. Maybe not like people who are in their 60s and 70s. I think probably they've got their group, and definitely talking was more, talking things out might have been more, there might have been more onus on that. But I also don't think like that older generation is the best at self-expression. Whereas I do think that there is a part of like this younger generation that says every feeling they have. So I don't know. I think that across the board, there's kind of room for improvement.
yeah, we can all learn something from each other.
Yeah. And by the way, I advocate, one of the things I talk about in the book is when you're looking at your kind of inner friend circle and kind of with a critical eye, it's really nice to have a shared experience with you, people that like, can almost kind of finish your sentences. You don't have to explain a lot. That is nice in certain ways, but you want to make sure that the people in your world, you haven't created like an echo chamber. And so it's really important to when you're looking at the kind of core group around you, to say, you want to have the same core values for sure as everybody in that group, but you want to also kind of put energy and curiosity around people that have a really different life experience than you, that, maybe grew up in a different place. Maybe they have a different religious background or sexual identity. And also, not everybody has to be within plus or minus 4 years of your age range. It's also really nice to be able to have somebody that's older than you and maybe somebody that's younger than you, because it is so important to get these different perspectives in your world. And I'm not talking about going out and finding like a token Asian friend or a token senior friend. But what I am talking about is really being curious about how other people live and their experience in the world, because you're ultimately going to get a much more dynamic friend experience. And I think one of the beautiful things about friendship is, while obviously it's relational, having different people in your life opens up different parts of yourself that would otherwise lay dormant. And so the more dynamic your kind of inner circle friend group is, the more dynamic an existence you yourself as an individual can live and can experience. You want to open up the aperture as wide as you can. It's a richer relationship experience, and it's a far more profound kind of self-growth or self-realization path. So I was just kind of talking about older, younger people. It's important to get those perspectives in your world if you can.
I think that's so important. It's interesting. You hear a lot of people talk about toxic relationships. This is toxic.
Mm-hmm.
That's toxic. You
Yeah.
think we live in a nuclear dump,
Yeah.
I mean, so okay, so let's break that down. I mean, is it just that we just don't vibe well with each other, or, do we need to really identify what characteristics make a good friendship?
So both, and you kind of hit the nail on the head with this. I hear all the time in my office, not just my office, but with friends, my own friends, being like, "Oh my God, he's so toxic. She's so toxic. They're so toxic." And I stop, whoever's saying that every single time, and I say, hold on. Let's look at this, okay? What we're doing when you kind of throw responsibility and blame on somebody entirely, is when you throw your own responsibility away, you're throwing your own personal power away, right? It's very easy to blame somebody for the entire explosion of a relationship, or for, it could be work related, whatever, but for the purposes of this conversation, the book, a relationship. But what you're doing then, by kind of shying away from your own responsibility in the situation, is, number one, you're never going to solve that problem if there's a problem to be solved within the relationship, right? Because you've put blame on somebody else. But you've also missed a really big opportunity to have more information about yourself and to really grow, right? And what I mean by that is, often when people say that somebody else is toxic, let me be clear, that other person might be behaving badly, okay? But often when somebody is kind of been labeled as toxic within the relationship, when you look at that person, they actually have other friendships that are operating just fine, right? And so, to go back to what you were saying, it is, often the dynamic between the two of you. And again, that's not to take away responsibility if somebody's behaving badly, or to blame, the apparent quote unquote victim within the situation. But what you do need to look at is, why have I allowed this behavior when others haven't, right? What in me needs this drama? What in me needs this, whatever is happening within this relationship? I haven't stopped it. So why? And let me look at that. And so when you start to take responsibility, number one, it's obviously a great learning moment for you, but it's also where you start to operate from personal power, as opposed to throwing that away when you throw all of the responsibility on the other person. That's the thing I would say, that it's not necessarily, more times than not, it's not the other person that's necessarily toxic, terrible, toxic person. It's what's going on between you, the dynamic between you that has become toxic. And again, one person might be the instigator, but often you have become the enabler, and you need to look at that, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is you really do need it. It comes back to you. You really need to understand like what your needs are, and how and why they're not being met in a specific relationship, right? And so, and then also, not only how are they not being met in a relationship, what other relationship could they be met in, right? So can I find somebody that's who you want to attract, the people that are meeting your needs, again, that are seeing you and supporting you in a way that you want to be seen and supported. And so you do have to be very intentional about the relationships in your life. And you want to make sure that you have people that are pulling different parts out of you. So, for example, I'm a very introverted person. So counterintuitively, it's very important for me to have a friend or two that are extroverts, that are constantly kind of pulling me out of my shell, who, kind of insist we have dinner plans once a month. And every time I begrudgingly accept. And as I'm driving to the restaurant, I'm like, oh God, why did I sign up for this? And then without fail, every time I get there, I have an amazing time, and I come back and I'm feeling recharged. I'm feeling alive. Now, I'm not going to do that every weekend, but every couple months. It's really important for me, for example, to have people that kind of pull different sides out. And so that's just one example. But you want to, and I talk about all of the different types of kind of people or relationships that could be important for you. So when you're reading that, you can say, oh, okay, this one makes sense for me. This one makes sense for me. This one makes sense for me. And then you look at who's in your life and say, are these specific needs being met in the way I need to? And if they aren't, then you need to go out and find some people or work on existing relationships to help bring those needs to life. And then in terms of going back to your question about toxic, once you've established there's a toxic dynamic between the two of you, you have to then make a decision. Is this something I feel like I want to save if I could put the work in? Or is this something that just whatever is going on between us, this is kind of like a thing that's going to happen and I need to step away? And it's much better to do it that way, kind of logically and without big emotion, as opposed to staying locked in something, where there's a toxic dynamic, and then you ultimately end up having a huge kind of reaction, and it ends up being like an argument or a fight, and then it's just very messy that way. So you want to get out in front of these things, take responsibility, and then make the appropriate decisions based on whatever, again, your needs are.
Well, and it's interesting how much influence our friends have in maybe the ways that we present ourselves or the decisions we make. So I would think
Absolutely.
having this all like buttoned down would be so important.
Yeah, I mean, there is that expression that I talk about in the book. You are the five friends. You are, I can now of course can't remember it, but you are the five closest people in your life, or something like that. um, and it is true. These relationships really act as a mirror, right? And they kind of hold up a mirror to you, but they also hold up a mirror to the world. And so you do want to be really kind of selective. And again, I keep using this word intentional, but it's intentional because that's the power move. And that's the thing that's, if you are being intentional, is going to, number one, feel the best for you ultimately, and also represent you the best out in the world. And I think, now more than ever, that's really important. We have an opportunity to have friends as almost ambassadors, right? And as the chaos mounts, and there seems to be no end in sight, it's really fortifying to have, ambassadors out there in the world, kind of cheerleading for you, supporting for you, and also a sense of purpose for you as you cheerlead and support them.
So I was looking at your book, and gosh, there's so much great information here. Let's say that the person who makes a mistake is us.
Okay. Yeah.
How do we fix that?
Well, you want to own it. And that's the thing. Again, taking with, as my dad likes to say, with 100% responsibility, there's 100% freedom. And so it is hard when you make a mistake. But the first thing is realizing you made a mistake. So many of us are so built into our defenses that the slightest suggestion that we might have messed up, instead of being self-reflective, we project it right back onto the person, so it's like, oh, well, I did this. Well, you know what, you've done this, this, and this. And that gets you nowhere, right? Then it's a tit for tat. Both people are feeling bad, not seen or heard. And so the first thing I urge somebody to do is, if somebody comes to you and says, I really feel mad or hurt or whatever that you did X, is to not react at all and to think about it, right? Just think about it for a second. And even if you have gripes or grievances with the other person, deal with this first, right? Sit back, think about it, take ownership if in fact you did do something that was out of line or out of character, and be honest about that. And nothing is more disarming than a genuine apology. And it's okay to say, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize that. I probably should have realized that, so it's not like you're necessarily saying like, yes, I knew that and you're not admitting to being a bad person. You're admitting to not have awareness about something you did. And that's a big difference, right? And so I think, when we can get on the other side of this type of, kind of what we call clinically like a rupture and repair, your relationship ends up coming out so much stronger in the end. So having the ability to be vulnerable and say, yeah, I made a mistake and I really didn't mean to. I'm really sorry. This relationship's really important to me. I'm sorry that I've hurt it. I hope you can forgive me. These are real places of vulnerability and things that we're not, again, really used to, not ways we're really used to communicating within these friendships, within these relationships. So, and I talk, and I have exercises in the book, and conversation starters, just to kind of be honest and vulnerable, I think take you so far ahead if you can get on the other side of these things. But what I know for sure does not work is clamming up, being defensive, being reactive, not taking responsibility, deflecting responsibility. And that's what so often happens. And by the way, you don't need to wait also to be called out by a friend. if you realize you've done something wrong. Perhaps the most courageous, most respectful move, we often do know, like, oh man, I was just mean right there, or I behaved inappropriately. We're kind of just hoping that the other person swallows it, or it'll go away. But if you feel like you made a bad move, owning that, pulling the person aside or calling the person and saying, I just reflected on last night and I said this thing and I woke up thinking, wow, I really shouldn't have said that. That's not like me. And I really apologize and I'm sorry. And I hope that wasn't hurtful. To be able to do that and not even wait for somebody to kind of call you out on it, that's the power move. That's the power move for you as an individual. That's the power move for that relationship. These are things that are going to move both you individually and the relationship forward. So even though it's scary and vulnerable to do that, that's again taking action, that's happening to the relationship as opposed to the relationship happening to you. And that's where you want to always be operating from.
So, is this all part of how to make friends as an adult? When people are going,
Yes.
gosh, I made friends when I was a kid. How is it so much different now as an adult?
Well, because this is, I think, the first time, and especially the older you get, let's say you're in your 40s or 50s and you've got so much freedom in a sense. Like you're not like, you're not really restricted. You probably have done fairly, you're kind of on the tail end of a career. You might be on the tail end of children if you've had children. And so situationally, you're not kind of locked down to anything. And so there really is a lot of, choice. And that's kind of scary because again, you have to put yourself in places that you think you might find people, that are really meaningful. But in that choice, there's a lot of great opportunity, right? To really show up for the first time in your life as whoever it is you want to be, whoever it is you feel you really are. You're not necessarily encumbered again by situations that you need to kind of operate within. And this is kind of true. It starts really when you start going, if you, and this is if you go in a more traditional path, but if you, when you go to college or university, or at least when you exit high school, right? Because at school, you've got the ultimate kind of situation. You're, as I talked about, for the first kind of 15 years of your life, 15, 16, 17 years of life, you're just dropped in situations and say, this is a group, now find somebody you like. As soon as you kind of leave high school, then you're out there in the world and you're making life choices. And along with those life choices, you're going to get kind of infused in different potential social situations. And then you're really kind of choosing, you've got much more choice in who you're hanging out with and who you're creating friendships with. And often you kind of align with phase of life, like university friends. And then you've got your kind of first career, earlier in your career friends. And then you've got your like, all of a sudden your friends start to all be getting married and having families. And then you're kind of zoned and, swooped into that world. And so at all these various points, we have different opportunities to make choices. We have different opportunities to do an audit and say, okay, where am I now? Do these friend groups still make sense for me? Do these friendships still make sense for me? We don't do that. We should do that, right? And so that's another kind of big thing about the book is like constantly kind of checking in with yourself at various phases of life and say, okay, what makes sense for me now? And then making choices around that.
Well, I know that you're so passionate about this. My goodness, what a great book you have. I found it to be so useful regardless what age you are. I found it
Thank you.
really, it sets these real clear boundaries and clear expectations, not just for others, but for ourselves. I
Exactly.
really appreciated that. Erin, where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about your work?
Sure. So on all things social, I'm at Erin Falconer or at PickTheBrain. That's my blog. You can check out my blog at pickthebrain.com. And the books are all available wherever you buy books, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. We've got them at a lot of indie booksellers. So whatever your flavor is, my books are probably there.
So, Erin, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Erin. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, How to Break Up with Your Friends: Finding Meaning, Connection, and Boundaries in Modern Friendship. How to Break Up with Your Friends is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. And if you don't see it on the shelf, ask for them to order it. And of course, support our indie bookstores. You can also purchase How to Break Up with Your Friends from the publisher Sounds True at SoundsTrue.com. They're one of my favorite publishers, so make sure to drop by and check them out. I'd like to thank Jason Eastwood at Guitarfulness for sharing his inspiring music and talent with us. His music is known worldwide for cultivating atmospheres of harmony, inner peace, and clarity. Visit Jason's website at guitarfulness.com. Join his newsletter, be part of his community, and download his music. If you'd like to learn more, not only about how to break up with your friends, but also all the other great books in the Moments with Marianne book club, visit momentswithmarianne.com and get inspiration for your next great read. And also check out the Moments with Marianne book club pick of the month. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.